Attention Earth, Chen speaking. Let's start.
The emergency session beacon pulsed across 17 star systems, its crimson glow cutting through the void like a scalpel through flesh. Ambassador Vrel of the Corthian Consortium checked his chronometer for the 43rd time in the past hour, his triple-jointed fingers tapping an anxious rhythm against the armrest of his hover pod. The Senate chamber on Nexus Prime was filling up fast, and judging by the hushed whispers echoing through the vaulted hall, everyone knew exactly what this vote was about. Humans. Those bipedal nightmares from Sol 3 Earth. They called it. A backwater rock that had somehow managed to irritate half the galaxy in less than 2 centuries of interstellar contact. Varel could hardly believe it had come to this. But here they were about to vote on the most severe sanction in Senate history. Complete and total exclusion from galactic society. All representatives, please take your positions. The speaker's voice boomed through the chamber, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. Gorath the Unshakable, a Krenmar, whose species had evolved on a high-gravity world, presided over the session with all the warmth of a frozen neutron star. His 4 eyes swept the assembled delegates with obvious disdain. We convene today to address Resolution 974 Alpha, the matter of humanity. A ripple of chittering, growling, and various forms of alien agreement swept through the chamber. Vrel settled into his pod, watching as the holographic display materialized above the central dais. Images of human ships, human colonies, human representatives with their infuriatingly symmetrical faces filled the air. Let the record show, Gorath continued, his voice dripping with bureaucratic formality, that we have received 347 formal complaints regarding human activities in the past standard cycle alone. These complaints range from violation of trade protocols to cultural insensitivity. Cultural insensitivity. What a delightfully mild way to describe what humans had been doing. Vrel suppressed a shudder as he recalled his own encounter with a human diplomat named Marcus Webb. The man had looked him dead in the eyes, all 6 of them, and said, "You know, your species would be a lot more intimidating if you didn't smell like burnt cabbage when you're nervous." The sheer audacity, the complete lack of respect for established diplomatic norms. Representative Slicks from the Methane Collective undulated forward, her gaseous form shimmering with agitation. "Honorable Speaker, I must voice my constituents' concerns immediately. The humans have established no fewer than 12 mining operations in systems we had specifically marked as protected heritage sites. When confronted, their response was, and I quote from the official transcript, 'Finders keepers tentacle features.'" The chamber erupted. Some delegates bellowed in outrage, others clicked mandibles in sympathy. A few, Vrel noted with disgust, even seemed amused. "Order." Gorath's hammer crashed down, the sound echoing like a supernova. "We will maintain decorum during these proceedings, or I will clear this chamber faster than you can say hyperspace malfunction. Now Representative Slicks, please continue." Slicks's form pulsed a deep purple, a color that in her species indicated profound irritation. "Speaker, the disrespect extends far beyond mere territorial disputes. Humans have actively mocked our traditions, ignored our customs, and worst of all, they refuse to take anything seriously. When the High Council of Atmospheric Beings attempted to explain the sacred significance of our breeding nebulae, the human liaison actually laughed, and then suggested we lighten up and maybe try some yoga. Valar couldn't help himself. He barked out a sharp laugh before catching himself. Every eye stalk, sensor, and photoreceptor in the chamber swiveled toward him. Heat crept up his neck ridges. "Ambassador Vrel," Gorath rumbled, "do you find something amusing about the systematic degradation of galactic diplomatic standards?" No, Speaker," Vrel stammered, raising his hands in a placating gesture. I was reminded of my own encounters with the humans. They have this phrase, laughing to keep from screaming, and I believe I've come to understand it." Silence hung in the chamber for a moment before Gorath grunted. "Very well. Does the Corthian Consortium wish to add testimony to these proceedings?" Vrel stood, his pod rising to speaker level. "Might as well get this over with. Esteemed colleagues, I represent a consortium of 47 trading worlds. We have dealt with humans extensively over the past decade, and I must report that while they are, without question, the most frustrating species we have ever encountered, they are also terrifyingly effective at everything they attempt. Effective at causing problems," someone shouted from the back rows. "Yes," Vrel agreed, "but also effective at solving them. When the Drexian pirates raided our supply convoys through Sector 12, what did our own security forces do? They filed reports, requested additional funding, formed a committee to study the issue. The humans, 3 of their vessels, a captain named Jake Morrison, and exactly 17 hours later the pirate base was a debris field. A Vexorian delegate slithered forward, her scales glinting under the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. Ambassador Vrel, are you seriously defending these creatures? These mammals who have shown zero respect for established galactic order? I'm not defending them. Vrel clarified, choosing his words carefully. I'm warning you, all of you. We're about to vote to exclude humanity from galactic society, to cut them off from trade, diplomacy, and all forms of interaction. Has anyone stopped to consider what happens when you corner a predator species that views every obstacle as a personal challenge? The Vexorian hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a ruptured pipe. You speak as if they pose a threat. They're one species on one world. We are thousands of civilizations spanning millions of stars.
What could they possibly do?
Vrel opened his mouth to respond, but Gorath cut him off. The ambassador raises an interesting point, but we must focus on the matter at hand. We have documented evidence of human misconduct spanning 234 separate incidents. The motion before us is clear. Do we as a unified galactic community vote to exclude humanity from all Senate activities, trade agreements, and diplomatic relations until such time as they demonstrate respect for established norms? Representative Quillen of the Harmonic Convergence spoke up, his voice a melodious blend of tones that the translation matrix struggled to render. Speaker, if I may, what message does this send to other emerging species? That we welcome diversity only when it's convenient, that we punish those who don't immediately conform to our expectations. This isn't about conformity, shouted Representative Yax, a Gromalian whose thick hide was flushing crimson with anger. This is about basic respect. The humans have made a mockery of every single tradition we hold dear. They've questioned our authority, challenged our wisdom, and treated our most sacred ceremonies like entertainment. Perhaps, Quillen suggested gently, our ceremonies could use a bit of questioning. When was the last time we actually examined why we do things the way we do? The humans have been members of this Senate for only 83 standard cycles. We've been doing things our way for over 10,000. Maybe, just maybe, an outside perspective isn't entirely without merit. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, translation matrices overloading as multiple languages tried to render simultaneous arguments. Gorath's hammer crashed down repeatedly, but the din only grew louder. Through it all, Viel sat quietly, watching. He'd seen this coming for months. Hell, he'd written 3 separate reports predicting exactly this scenario. The humans were different. Too different. They didn't fit into the careful boxes that galactic society had constructed over millennia. They asked uncomfortable questions, challenged sacred assumptions, and worst of all, they had the infuriating habit of being right about 30% of the time. 30% might not sound like much, but in a society that prided itself on having figured everything out 10,000 years ago, even 1% was revolutionary. Enough. Gorath's voice cut through the chaos like a plasma cutter through butter. We will vote. Now. Resolution 974 Alpha. The complete exclusion of humanity from galactic society. All in favor. The chamber's voting system activated, each delegate's pod glowing with their choice. Green for yes, red for no, amber for abstention. Vrel watched as the lights flickered to life across the massive hall. Green, green, green. A few ambers scattered throughout, signs of hesitation or political calculation. His own pod awaited his input. He thought about Marcus Webb and that burnt cabbage comment. He thought about Captain Morrison and those 17 hours. He thought about every human he'd ever met, with their strange humor and stranger determination, their absolute refusal to accept that anything was impossible. He pressed red. The final tally appeared on the central display, 4,267 in favor, 83 against, 142 abstentions. The motion passes, Gorath declared, his voice laden with finality. Effective immediately, all diplomatic relations with Earth are severed. All trade agreements are nullified. All human vessels currently in galactic space have 72 hours to return to Sol system. Any human ship found outside their home system after that deadline will be impounded, and its crew detained. A cheer went up from the majority of the chamber. Delegates congratulated each other. Relief palpable in the air. The human problem had been solved. Order would be restored. Vrel didn't cheer. He sat in his pod, watching the celebration with a growing sense of dread coiling in his thorax. Around him, the 82 other dissenting votes looked similarly uneasy. They knew. They understood what the rest of the Senate apparently didn't. You don't poke a hornet's nest and expect the hornets to politely relocate. The session adjourned, and Varel made his way through the dispersing crowds toward the transit station. A hand, five-fingered and disturbingly warm, landed on his shoulder. He spun, finding himself face-to-face with Ambassador Lisa Park, one of Earth's senior diplomats. "Ambassador Varel," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Thank you for your vote." "It won't matter," Varel replied, genuine sadness in his voice. "I'm sorry, Ambassador, I truly am." Park smiled, but it wasn't the warm expression humans usually wore. This was something else. Something cold. Calculating. "Don't be sorry, Varel. You did what you thought was right. That's more than I can say for most of them." She gestured toward the departing delegates. "Can I tell you a secret?" Varel found himself nodding despite his better judgment. "We saw this coming 6 months ago," Park continued, her smile widening slightly. "We've been preparing, planning. You know what the funny thing is? The Senate just did us the biggest favor in human history." "How can you possibly see this as a favor?" Varel asked, genuinely confused. "Because now we don't have to play by your rules anymore," Park said simply. "No more committees. No more endless debates about whose traditions take precedence. No more kowtowing to species who think they've got everything figured out just because they've been doing it the same way for 10,000 years. She patted his shoulder again. "You're going to want to stock up on whatever you consider comfort food, Ambassador. Things are about to get very interesting." She walked away, leaving Varel standing alone in the corridor, his heart's pounding in asynchronous rhythm. Around him, celebrating delegates continued their exodus, completely unaware that they had just made the single most catastrophic mistake in galactic history. Verlara pulled out his communicator and sent a priority message to his homeworld. "Implement Protocol Omega. Maximum stockpiling of all strategic resources. Prepare defensive positions. Explanation to follow." Then he headed for the nearest bar. If humanity was about to do what he suspected they were about to do, he was going to need something much stronger than synthetic relaxation beverages. 72 hours until the deadline. The clock had started ticking, and Varel had a sinking feeling that when it stopped, the galaxy was going to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between winning a vote and winning what came after. The deadline arrived with all the fanfare of a supernova in a tin can. Varel sat in his personal quarters aboard the Corthian flagship Prosperity's Edge, monitoring no fewer than 17 different intelligence feeds simultaneously. His eyes, all 6 of them, darted between screens showing various sectors of galactic space. The 72-hour window had closed exactly 14 minutes ago, and so far nothing had happened. That somehow made it worse. Ambassador, his aide, a young Corthian named Plex, poked his head through the doorway. "The Senate has issued confirmation that all human vessels have departed regulated space. They're calling it a complete success." "They're calling it what?" Varel spun in his chair, nearly knocking over a container of his favorite fermented beverage. "A success. Plex, have you ever studied Earth history?" Plex's eye stalks drooped in confusion. "No, sir. Why would I? They're barely 2 centuries into space travel. What could they possibly have to teach us?" Varel pulled up a holographic display, his fingers flying over the controls. "Let me show you something. This is from their historical database, publicly available information they shared during their Senate application process. Here, World War II, mid-20th century by their calendar. Watch this." The hologram flickered to life, showing grainy footage of human cities reduced to rubble, massive explosions, endless columns of soldiers marching across continents. Plex's eyes widened. "They did this to themselves," Plex whispered. "Oh, it gets better," Varel said grimly, advancing the timeline. "After this war, which killed approximately 75 million of them, do you know what they did? They looked at the weapons they'd created, weapons that could literally split atoms and level entire cities, and they said, you know what, let's build bigger ones. Within 40 years they had enough nuclear weapons to sterilize their own planet 12 times over." "That's insane. That's humanity," Varel corrected. "And here's the part that should terrify you. They knew it was insane. They understood they were building weapons that could end their entire species, and they built them anyway. Because the alternative, letting someone else build them first, was unacceptable. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Plex? Humans would rather burn down everything, including themselves, than lose." Plex's skin tone shifted to a pale green, his species equivalent of going white with fear. But surely the Senate considered this before voting. The Senate considered 17,000 years of tradition, and approximately 15 minutes of actual human psychology. Varel said, turning back to his monitors. Now get out of here. I need to concentrate. Plex scurried away, and Vrel returned to his surveillance feeds. Still nothing. Human ships had indeed returned to Sol System, every single one accounted for. The Senate's Enforcement Division had confirmed it themselves. Complete compliance. Too complete. Vrel's communicator chirped. Incoming message, Priority Alpha, from Ambassador Park. Against his better judgment, he accepted. Park's face materialized in holographic form, and Vrel noticed immediately that she was smiling. Not the diplomatic smile she'd worn during Senate sessions, but something genuine, almost excited. Ambassador Vrel, she said cheerfully, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just watching my civilization potentially collapse, Vrel replied dryly. You know the usual. What do you want, Park? I wanted to give you a heads up, Park said, her smile widening. Professional courtesy. One of the 83 who voted against this mess to another. You might want to check the Galactic trade networks in about 3 minutes. What did you do? Me? Nothing. I'm just a diplomat. But my government, well, they've been busy. See, turns out when you exclude someone from your trading system, they're free to build their own. And when you're humanity, and you've spent the last 2 centuries being consistently underestimated, you tend to have a few surprises ready. The connection cut off, leaving Varol staring at empty air. 3 minutes. He pulled up the Galactic Trade Network, the massive interconnected system that facilitated commerce between thousands of worlds. Everything looked normal. Shipping lanes hummed with activity, trade goods flowing along established routes, credits changing hands in the intricate dance of interstellar economics. Then the first alert popped up. Trade Route Beta 7 reporting significant price disruption. Rare earth elements flooding the market. Then another. Sector 15 experiencing unprecedented availability of manufactured goods. Origin unknown. Then another, and suddenly Vrel's screen was a cascade of alerts, each one screaming about market disruptions, price crashes, and the sudden appearance of goods that shouldn't exist in such quantities. No, Vrel breathed. No, they didn't. They couldn't have. But they had. Within 20 minutes, the galactic economy was in freefall. Prices for essential resources, goods that had maintained stable values for centuries, suddenly plummeted as massive quantities appeared on independent markets, not the Senate-controlled networks, but new ones, pop-up trading hubs that hadn't existed 72 hours ago. Beryl traced the origin points. All of them, every single one, led back to human corporations operating through non-Senate intermediaries. Species that had abstained from the vote, or voted against it, suddenly found themselves with exclusive access to human goods at prices that undercut galactic markets by 30 to 40%. Those magnificent lunatics, Vrel muttered, equal parts horrified and impressed. They stockpiled. They built entire shadow supply chains. They've been planning this for months. His communicator exploded with incoming calls. Representatives from a dozen different trading consortiums, all demanding to know what was happening, all panicking as their carefully balanced economic models collapsed like houses of cards in a hurricane. Varel ignored them all. Instead, he pulled up the Senate's emergency communication channel. Gorath's face appeared and the speaker looked like he'd aged 100 years in the past hour. Ambassador Val Gorath said, his voice strained, I don't suppose you have any insights into this economic catastrophe. Catastrophe. Tavel couldn't help the laugh that escaped. Lies speaker, this isn't a catastrophe. This is a warning shot. The humans are demonstrating exactly what happens when you exclude the galaxy's most aggressively competitive species from your marketplace. They build their own, and they build it better. This is economic warfare. No, Vrel corrected. Economic warfare would be them actively destroying our markets. What they're doing is offering better deals to species who didn't vote to exclude them. That's just capitalism, speaker. You can't fault them for being good at it. Gorath's face flushed a deep purple. The Senate will respond to this. We have resources, connections, centuries of established trade relationships. Tad, Burrell said quietly. You had those things. Right now I'm watching 47 different species reroute their trade agreements to human-affiliated networks, because the prices are too good to ignore. You know what the real genius of this is? They're not forcing anyone. Every species making this choice is doing it voluntarily, because it's in their economic best interest. The channel went silent for a moment before Gorath spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. What do they want? I don't know, Vrel admitted, but I suspect we're about to find out. As if on cue, every communication system in the Corthian fleet, and presumably across the entire galaxy, received the same broadcast. It was audio only, no video, but Vrel recognized the voice immediately. Marcus Webb, the burnt cabbage guy. Hello, Galactic community. Webb's voice carried the same casual confidence that had irritated Vrel during their first meeting. This is Marcus Webb, speaking on behalf of the Terran Commerce Initiative. I want to start by saying there are no hard feelings about the whole exclusion thing. Really, we get it. We're new, we're different, we stepped on some toes, totally understandable. Vrel could practically hear the smile in his voice. But here's the thing, Webb continued. You excluded us from your system. You didn't exclude everyone else from ours. So we've spent the last 6 months building relationships with species who see mutual benefit in trade partnerships. The Methane Collective. Turns out they really needed the atmospheric processors we developed. The harmonic convergence. Big fans of our acoustic technology. Even some of your member species have quietly reached out, looking for better deals on resources their governments have been overcharging them for. A pause, perfectly timed for dramatic effect. Now we could have done this quietly. Built our little economic network, stayed in our corner of the galaxy, minded our own business. But where's the fun in that? So instead we're going public. Effective immediately. Any species interested in joining the Terran Free Trade Association is welcome to apply. No membership fees. No Byzantine regulations that take 50 years to navigate. No committees that meet twice a decade to discuss whether discussing a proposal is worth proposing a discussion about. Vrel heard choking sounds coming from Gorath's end of the communication channel. Just fair prices, fast shipping, and actual customer service, Webb concluded. Oh, and one more thing. To all the species who voted to exclude us, no worries, you're still welcome to join. We're not petty like that, we just ask that you bring something to the table besides tradition and superiority complexes. Webb out. The broadcast ended, and chaos erupted. Vrel's communicator practically melted from the volume of incoming calls. The Senate's emergency channels lit up like a festival display. Across the galaxy, governments scrambled to respond to constituents demanding access to these better trade deals, corporations panicking about suddenly obsolete business models, and economists trying to calculate just how badly the humans had outmaneuvered the entire galactic community. Ambassador Plex burst into the room, his eye stalks practically vibrating with panic. The Consortium Council is demanding immediate consultation. They want to know if we should apply to this Terran trade thing. Tell them yes, Vrel said immediately. And tell them to do it before the application queue gets too long. The humans are going to be selective about this, I guarantee it. But the Senate, our obligations. The Senate just committed economic suicide, Vrel interrupted. Our obligation is to the Consortium's survival, and right now that means getting on the human bandwagon before it leaves the station. He turned back to his monitors, watching as trade routes realigned in real time, centuries of established patterns dissolving like sugar in water. Besides, I voted against this insanity. My conscience is clear. Over the next 6 hours, 43 species applied to join the Terran Free Trade Association. By the end of the day, that number had climbed to 107. The Senate convened an emergency session, but attendance was noticeably sparse. Representatives who'd cheered the human exclusion vote were now conspicuously absent, presumably busy negotiating trade deals they'd sworn to oppose. Vrel watched it all unfold with a mixture of horror and admiration. The humans hadn't fired a single shot, hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't broken any laws. They'd simply done what humans did best: identified a problem, found the most efficient solution, and executed it with ruthless precision. 3 days after the deadline, Ambassador Park sent Vrel another message. Told you it would get interesting, she said. That same smile playing across her face. By the way, the Curthian Consortium's application has been approved. Welcome to the association, Ambassador. We're looking forward to a long and profitable relationship. You planned this from the beginning, Villar said, shaking his head in disbelief. The whole time you were sitting in Senate sessions, enduring insults and mockery, you were building this. We prefer to think of it as contingency planning, Park replied. My predecessor, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, she had this saying, never start a fight but always finish it. The Senate started this fight when they decided we weren't worth their time. We're just finishing it. And the rest of the galaxy? What happens to the species still loyal to the Senate? Park's expression softened slightly. They'll adapt or they won't. We're not looking to destroy the Senate system, Vrel. We're just offering an alternative. Competition is healthy. Maybe it'll motivate them to actually reform some of those 10,000-year-old traditions everyone's so proud of. You're enjoying this way too much, Vrel observed, Can you blame us? Park laughed. We spent 83 years being treated like the galaxy's embarrassing relatives. The species everyone tolerated but nobody respected. And now we're essential. Not because we forced anyone, but because we offered something better. That's not revenge, Ambassador. That's just good business. The connection ended, and Vrel sat back in his chair, finally allowing himself to relax for the first time in days. Outside his viewport, stars wheeled in their ancient dance, indifferent to the economic revolution reshaping galactic civilization. His communicator chirped one more time. A message from Gorath, text only. Emergency Senate session in 6 hours. Attendance mandatory. Topic: renegotiation of human exclusion. Vrel smiled, a gesture his species reserved for genuine amusement. 6 hours. Took them longer than I expected. He pulled up the application he'd submitted to the Terran Free Trade Association and reviewed the terms one more time. Fair pricing, transparent regulations, actual efficiency. Revolutionary concepts in a galaxy that had been doing things the same way for longer than most species had possessed spaceflight. Maybe, Vrel thought, just maybe, getting excluded was the best thing that ever happened to humanity, and perhaps in the long run, it might turn out to be the best thing that happened to everyone else too. The galaxy had voted against Earth. The vote had been their last mistake, but it was also, Vrel suspected, going to be their most valuable lesson. Humans didn't need permission to succeed. They just needed motivation, and nothing motivated a human quite like someone telling them they couldn't do something. The Senate had told them they couldn't participate in galactic society. Humanity's response: build a better one. Vrel raised his glass in a solitary toast. To humanity, he said to the empty room, the galaxy's most terrifying traitors, may we all survive the prosperity they're about to inflict on us. Outside, the stars continued their dance, and somewhere in Sol System millions of humans were probably laughing. They'd earned it.
They said humanity didn't belong, didn't fit their ancient systems, their perfect order. So we build our own because that's what humans do. We don't beg for seats at tables, we build their better tables. And when the galaxy finally understands that, it's already too late.